Hi, welcome! Today I am going to explore solving equations. This is so important to understand in your maths going forward and for MCAT. So I want to make sure you have a very good understanding of how we solve equations and why we do it. If you've only learned these as rules but you never actually understood why it works the way it does, then it's very important you have a look at this and see and make sure you understand it. Because in an exam situation you might be faced with something that you're not used to seeing the way it is, or you might just go blank because of the pressure or in the situation that you're in. And that's where it helps to have an understanding of how these rules work, so that you don't have to just try and memorize them. You can actually work them out if you get stuck. Alright, so let's have a go. Here we've got an equation for today, and I'm trying to solve it for x. So that means I'm trying to figure out what value for x would make this calculation equal to 10. Okay, so before we get to this equation, I'm going to just look at some more basic equations to help us learn the rules for equations. And this is what you can do in the exam if you get stuck. So here's a very basic equation. 1 plus 2 equals 3. It's very straightforward. So let's just talk about an equation. An equation is anything that has two sides that are equal to each other. So the equal sign is the important part of an equation. And the equal always needs to be true. That means that this side, whatever value it calculates to, has to be exactly equal to this side. It doesn't matter what the numbers are on either side, as long as they are both exactly the same value when you calculate the parts of each side. And once we know that, we can go and manipulate this equation however we want, as long as we make sure that both sides always end up with the same value. And that's going to help us to then use that same idea to solve for x by eliminating and manipulating the equation up at the top. So let's just quickly explore this. If I wanted to go and change one of these sides, let's just say I wanted to go and add 5 to the right hand side. So I am changing the value of the right hand side. Now I would need to do a change to the value on the left hand side as well. And it's important to know how you would do that change. With plus it's easy. I can just go and add the same thing on this side as well. And I can check that that is in fact true. 1 plus 2 plus 5 is 8. And 3 plus 5 is also 8. So our equation is true. Therefore, we know that our manipulation of the equation is fine. So when you come to adding, you need to do the same thing on both sides, and the equation will hold true. Now, let's quickly do the same thing for minus, and just see what if we minus. If we minus 5 instead, what happens to our equation? Again, we would do exactly the same thing on both sides. 1 plus 2 is 3, minus 5 is negative 2. 3 minus 5 is negative 2. Again, both sides have the same value, so our equation is true. So we can just leave it like that, it's fine. So making a plus or a minus, as long as you do the same value change on both sides, it is fine. You may have learned this as a scale. Back in your earlier schooling years, they kind of taught these as scales. So where you had like weights, and if you take 5 away from one side, you need to keep it balanced by taking 5 away from the other side as well. That's often the way that is taught. Okay, so let's have a look at other operations though. So plus and minus are quite straightforward. It's the other operations you have to be a bit more careful of. If I was to now go and say let's change this side by multiplying by 5, if I was to do exactly the same thing like I do with plus and minus, we'll see that there's a problem. If I say this becomes 1 plus 2 times 5 is 10 equals 15. This is because the order of operations is very important. That's your BEDMAS, and in BEDMAS we do multiplies before we do plus. So we have to do the 2 times 5 first, which is 10. And only then do we do the plus. So once you know that rule, you'll know that this is actually not working out. 1 plus 10 is 11, which is not equal to 15. Our equal is not happy. It's not true. It is not true. So we have made a mistake somewhere along the line. And what is that mistake? Well, the mistake is that when it comes to multiplying, and in fact all your other remaining operations, you've got to put everything in brackets on both sides. Doesn't matter so much if it's 3 because there's only one term, but I'll do it because it's just a good practice to make sure both sides are in brackets before you apply the change. So now that it's in brackets, following my operations, my order of operation rules, BEDMAS, brackets is actually first. that means that we're going to multiply this 5 by both the things inside this bracket in this case. Okay, so we do 1 times 5 is 5 plus 2 times 5 is 10. And this side is just 3 times 5 is 15. Is this true now? 15 equals 15 is true. That is correct. So that's a good way of helping you to remember what happens when you times one side by a value. You make sure that you consider those two sides in brackets. That will help you to make sure you multiply the right things. Okay, similarly for divides, if I was to now instead do a division on both sides, let's say divide by 6, I'll just go in red, I would still keep both sides in brackets. And in algebra we really like to do our divisions as fractions instead. So actually I wouldn't usually write it like that, I would actually write it like a fraction. But you could still do the divide by as well. And hopefully you can see straight away by doing it this way, if I was to now think of 1 plus 2 first in brackets, that would be 3 over 6. And this side is just 3 over 6. So we can see clearly the equal sign is still true. So our calculation or our manipulation is fine for the divides. And that'll be the same thing for if you were to square a side. Now a quick look at that. If I was to go and square 3, I would also have to square this side. And again, as long as I keep it in brackets, it should work. If I didn't have brackets, can you see that only the 2 would get squared? So that would be 1 plus 4, which is 5, which is not equal to 9. Because this would make 5, this would make 9, that's not equal. So again, it's important that we consider, this in brackets. 1 plus 2 in brackets. That means we first need to calculate this bracket, 1 plus 2, then we can square it. That would give us 3 squared equals 3 squared, or 9 equals 9. Okay, so the plus and the minus, you pretty much can just attach it to the end or even the beginning of each side. But with all the other operations, make sure you consider them as being in brackets for the whole side. And we'll see how it works as well now that we get to our main equation we want to solve. Right, let's go back over here. So here's our equation. We're trying to solve for x. So the way we're going to use what we just learned to solve our problem is we're wanting to manipulate this equation to get rid of all these things that are on the side that x is on. And to get rid of these things, we can do whatever we want to the equation because it's got the equal sign, as long as we do it on both sides. Okay, so now in the order in which to get rid of things, you can sort of do it in different orders depending on the numbers, but the safest order usually is actually the reverse order of operations, or reverse BEDMAS. So starting with any addition or subtractions that are not attached to x is actually the best one to start with. They're kind of just hanging there loosely by itself. It's not part of this term, so it's an easy one to get rid of first. Let's do that first. So to get rid of a plus 8, we can manipulate this side and say, well, we don't want the plus 8 anymore. We are going to minus 8 from this side. So it's actually minusing from the whole side, but remember with plus and minus, you can just think of it at the end. That means we also need to change the value on this side by minusing 8 as well, in order to make sure that the equal sign holds true, that it's balanced. Now on this side, our plus 8 minus 8 has just been cancelled because it just makes 0. So we have left this whole term here still, 3x minus 2 over 5 equals, and now we can calculate 10 minus 8, which is just 2. Okay, so we've got rid of one of our terms. See how much simpler it is already by eliminating that number? Now the next thing I would get rid of then is the divides, or the fraction. It's the next kind of ugliest thing there that's attached to the x part. So to get rid of divide by 5, because remember this fraction line is the same as divides, the opposite of dividing is multiplying. So we're going to multiply this side by x. And think of it again as in brackets now. Okay, so it doesn't really matter if you write this times 5 at the front or the back, but obviously there's a bit more space at the front. So I'm multiplying this side by 5, and this is where you need to make sure you understand how to multiply with fractions. In this case, this times by 5 will just cancel out the divide by 5. So if we do that part first, like so, obviously we can't calculate this part in the brackets first because we don't know what x is, but we can just cancel out that 5, okay? And then we can work out this side. So this will leave us with 3x minus 2 equals 2 times 5 is 10. Alright. Now we are looking much better already. We've got no more fractions to deal with, which is great. The next thing to deal with then is this negative 2 that's hanging out by itself, separate from x now. And to get rid of minus 2, we need to plus 2. So opposite of minus is plus. That's because minus 2 plus 2 will just make 0, which means that would just disappear. So finally we have our 3x left, and 10 plus 2 is 12. Okay, so lastly, we almost have x by itself, so we almost know the value, but we need to still get rid of a 3. And remembering that the 3 in front of the x is being multiplied by that x, and the opposite of multiplying is dividing. So we're going to divide this 3, or this term, by 3. I like to write my divides as fractions, so I'll just do that on both sides like so. So this side 3 over 3 will just cancel because it's just 1, so we are left with x, and 12 divided by 3 is 4. There we go, we found our answer for x. So we believe that if x is 4 in this calculation, the answer should be 10. Now it's very important that you check your answer, because you could easily have made a mistake along the way. So if you just leave it there assuming it's done, so many times I see students make silly little mistakes along the way, and you kind of end up kicking yourself. So make sure you do check it, and the way to check it is to take this 4 that you found for x and actually put it in this equation now and check that it does in fact equal 10. So let's do that quickly. We'll do 3 times, and instead of x we'll now write 4 minus 2 over 5, and then we also have our plus 8 still. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly do this on this end. So 3 times 4 is 12, minus 2 over 5 plus 8. 12 minus 2 is 10 over 5 plus 8. 10 over 5, or 10 divided by 5 is 2, plus 8 equals 10. Which is what we were wanting the equation to equal, which means that our value for x is correct and we have solved it correctly. Okay, so the important thing to take away there is when you want to manipulate equations in order to solve for a value, you can get rid of things by doing the same thing on both sides each time, but be particularly careful of having brackets when you've got more than one term on a side and you are doing operations like times, divides, square roots, and the like. Alright, hope that was helpful. Again, any questions, ask me in the comments. See you guys.